What is going on, Learn About Bit fam? In this video today, we are going to be talking about everybody's favorite topic, nation state game theory, with the prospect of the United States potentially creating a national strategic Bitcoin reserve. This has got other countries around the globe thinking, hey, maybe we should start doing the same thing, and maybe we should front run the United States by buying Bitcoin now while it's under $100,000. We know that if the United States does go through with this national strategic Bitcoin reserve plan and they try to stack 1 million Bitcoin, that is going to make the Bitcoin price go a lot higher. If we do see a developed country with a large economy like the United States start actively stacking Bitcoin and telling the whole world that they're doing so, that is really going to speed up this nation state adoption process. Other countries are going to have to stack Bitcoin as well, for one, to hedge against Bitcoin success, right? If the US starts stacking Bitcoin and the price goes up to $1 million and you're a country and you don't have any, well, you just messed up. And also because countries want to build wealth, right? If you're a country, you should want to hold assets that appreciate in value over time, right? If you buy into Bitcoin right now as a country under 100K and the price goes up to $1 million and you have a good chunk of it, well, you've just created a ton of wealth for your country. So in this video, we are going to be talking nation state game theory. We're going to get into some of the reasons for why a country would want to start stacking Bitcoin. We'll maybe get into some countries that could potentially be next to create a strategic Bitcoin reserve, and we'll get into some other stuff, some other details here and there as well. Before I do get into it, please make sure to like and subscribe. Really appreciate your support trying to get this channel pumping like Bitcoin heading into the new year. So don't forget to hit that subscribe. Let's get into it. So obviously, with Donald Trump running a pro Bitcoin campaign and making the promise of a national strategic Bitcoin stockpile, this has got the whole world buzzing around Bitcoin. Now, the question is he actually going to do it? And I've actually been looking on Polymarket, which has been my new favorite site for seeing how people really feel about certain questions, about certain topics. I feel like it's a really good place to get a more accurate poll, because if people are putting their money on something, that means that they're maybe taking bias out of the equation, right? They're betting on what they truly think is most likely. According to Polymarket, there is a 34% chance that Trump is going to create a national strategic Bitcoin reserve. However, I've been looking on X and I've been seeing a lot of signs that it may be more likely than that. We saw Cynthia Lummis post the proposed strategic reserve bill on X the other day. BlackRock has come out and endorsed the idea of a Bitcoin strategic reserve. And I also saw that Dennis Porter, someone who is very active in the Bitcoin space, announced that there's the possibility that we could see this strategic Bitcoin reserve come into play through an executive order. So there is a lot of traction behind this Bitcoin strategic reserve idea. And I think if we see Bitcoin's price continue to go higher, this will just further incentivize the United States government to make this happen. You also think about all these people who Trump is potentially putting in his cabinet, in his administration. There's a lot of Bitcoiners who are going to get behind this. And we know that the Republican Party also controls the House and Senate now. So it is going to be easier to get these types of things passed if they want to get them passed. Now, along with this US strategic reserve proposal, we're also seeing individual states come out and make their own proposals to start holding Bitcoin and stacking Bitcoin as a state. We saw that Pennsylvania came out with a proposed strategic reserve bill. Florida's CFO endorsed the idea of a Bitcoin reserve for the state, and that makes sense because we know that Florida is a state that is big on financial autonomy. We know that Florida is very pro Bitcoin, so I wouldn't be surprised if this is one of the first states that we see start stacking Bitcoin as a state. And according to Dennis Porter, there are at least 10 states who are getting ready to introduce some sort of Bitcoin reserve legislation. So we're really seeing Bitcoin adoption take off at the state level, which is awesome. If the US can really set the example for the world and start accepting Bitcoin, stacking Bitcoin in its state government, in its national government, this is going to really speed up the Bitcoin adoption process. So just awesome to see some of this stuff coming out over the past couple of weeks. And we also know that Bitcoin adoption is really taking off at the business level. We've seen a ton of businesses, publicly traded companies come out recently and say, hey, we're in on this Bitcoin thing. We're creating a Bitcoin treasury and we are actively allocating to it. Now, it is becoming evident that running as a pro Bitcoin candidate is a winning strategy. We've seen this in El Salvador. We've seen it in Argentina somewhat. We know Javier Milei kind of ran on a pro Bitcoin stance, but really just a pro people stance, right? People should be able to use whatever money they choose to use. We've seen it here in the United States with Donald Trump winning this past election pretty decisively, right? I think people were a little surprised how well Donald Trump did in some of those swing states and really just in counties around the US. And I think that's in part to the fact that he was a big Bitcoin supporter throughout his campaign. There are a lot of people who hold Bitcoin in the US, and they're probably going to vote for someone who agrees with their views on Bitcoin, right? Who's going to support that space. We are going to see more politicians run on a pro Bitcoin stance and make promises to the Bitcoin community as they realize that this is a good strategy to win whichever election you're trying to win, right? If you can win over that Bitcoin crowd, it could make a big difference for you as a politician, for your career. It could help you get elected. We saw this past weekend as Polish presidential candidate Sławomir Mencen announced that if he is elected, he is going to create a Bitcoin reserve for Poland. He said that he wants Poland to be a cryptocurrency destination. He wants Bitcoin businesses to come there. He wants lower taxes and he wants to create a friendly regulatory environment. And countries are going to be smart to do this because if countries create a pro Bitcoin environment, they are going to attract businesses. They're going to keep Bitcoin in the country. They're going to keep people from leaving or sending their Bitcoin somewhere else to family outside the region. And it's really just going to help your economy a lot as a country. Just a couple months ago, we saw Suriname presidential candidate Maya Parpo announce that if she is elected president, she will make Bitcoin legal tender, trying to follow El Salvador's lead. So we are going to see more and more politicians come out over time and make Bitcoin promises to the community in order to win these elections. But it's important that we hold these politicians accountable, right? Do they actually come through on their promises? I'm sure we'll hear a lot of politicians say, hey, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. And we've heard this throughout history with politics, right? Empty promises. They don't come through on their promise once they get elected. Now let's talk about some of the countries that could be next to implement a strategic Bitcoin reserve. Obviously, we know that the United States is right there and it could potentially happen next year, which would be huge and awesome. We know that El Salvador was really the first country to make the bold move to say, hey, we are making Bitcoin legal tender and we are stacking Bitcoin. And I love how El Salvador has just been stacking 1 Bitcoin a day. I'm sure they're doing some chunk buys here or there, but there's this great visual I want to show, which shows El Salvador stacking. And as you can see, this chart, it shows them adding 1 Bitcoin to their Bitcoin reserve every day. We've really seen El Salvador turn their country around. At one point, it was the murder capital of the world, and now you could argue that it is safer than the United States. This is in part due to their Bitcoin strategy, but also in large part just due to their leadership and Nayib Bukele, who has done a great job of turning the country around. But one thing El Salvador has done for the world when we think about Bitcoin is they have set an example of what Bitcoin can do for your country. Bitcoin's price has gone up a lot since El Salvador started stacking Bitcoin. And because of that, they have seen their wealth grow. They're able to pay off their debts as a country, and they're really becoming more prosperous. El Salvador is becoming a destination. People now are not running away from there. They kind of want to live there, which is awesome. So if I'm another country in South America and I'm seeing what is happening in El Salvador, I'm thinking, hey, we should imitate that strategy, right? We should copy them because clearly it is working. And another country that I think could be next to creating a strategic Bitcoin reserve is Argentina. We know that Argentina's president, Javier Milei, is a libertarian. He is not a fan of central banking. He's a fan of freedoms for people. He wants people to have autonomy. And we know that he has spoke highly of Bitcoin in the past. He's also good friends with Nayib Bukele, the president of El Salvador. So to me, this just kind of makes sense that we could see Argentina be the next country to really adopt this Bitcoin stacking strategy, or one of them. Now, the thing about countries stacking Bitcoin is it's kind of in their best interest not to tell everyone, right? If you could stack Bitcoin and not make a big fuss about it, not let people know, you don't drive the price up too much, right? If Argentina were to make a big announcement and say, hey, we are going to try to acquire 500,000 Bitcoin, then that is going to drive the price of Bitcoin up a lot, right? That is going to drive nation state game theory faster. But if you can just stack quietly as a country, buy a little Bitcoin here and there and get exposure, then I think that is probably in most countries' best interest. So I'm sure there are a ton of countries out there who are stacking Bitcoin right now, and they're just not telling the world. That's something that we need to keep in mind. If countries don't have to tell us, then why tell everyone, right? Why not keep your finances private? It's also very possible that we could see other countries in South America look to create a Bitcoin reserve, right? We know that South America has a history of currency devaluation and poor governance. And you have El Salvador right there thriving, providing the example for how you can succeed as a country. I think that eventually a lot of these countries in South America will give in and start stacking Bitcoin as well if they aren't already. The tough part about accepting Bitcoin for most of these countries around the world is they don't want to give up their monopoly on money. If we see countries heavily invest in Bitcoin, what is that going to do to fiat currencies? It's going to devalue them, right? It could lead to fiat currencies going extinct. So as a government, you kind of don't want to accept Bitcoin because you want to maintain your monopoly on money. But as Bitcoin grows larger, you kind of have to buy in to hedge against its success. We will see how many countries come out and shout to the world, hey, we're stacking Bitcoin. Maybe this nation state adoption happens on more of a discrete level. But as we see the price really shoot up a lot higher, it will become obvious that nation states are buying into this asset. In terms of some other countries that could be next to have a public strategic Bitcoin reserve, you think about European countries, maybe Switzerland. We know that Switzerland has been a leader in finance throughout history, and they may be willing to make that announcement that, hey, we are a very pro Bitcoin country. We're going to have a strategic Bitcoin reserve, low taxes on Bitcoin, in order to attract business, in order to attract Bitcoin to their country, because they're smart and they realize that if they are accepting of this and they create a good environment for it, it is going to really create a better economic picture for them. We can also think about countries that have been very open to new technologies like Singapore and Japan, maybe countries that are looking to avoid sanctions like Russia and Iran. Historically, countries with a history of currency devaluation and inflation, these are countries where we see a lot of Bitcoin adoption from the people who live there because they need an alternative. And maybe in a continent like Africa, we could see more countries create strategic Bitcoin reserves if the governments are willing to make that move. I already talked about South America. It is difficult to predict how nation state game theory is going to play out because, like I said, I think a lot of countries are going to be stacking Bitcoin discreetly, and really all countries are incentivized to stack Bitcoin. If Bitcoin is outperforming every other asset, as a country, you could really grow your wealth, right? You could bring prosperity to your country by stacking Bitcoin. If the US does in fact go through with this national strategic Bitcoin reserve plan, then the price is going to go up a lot. So I just think right now we are probably going to see a lot of nation states front running the US and doing it on the low, not telling everyone. One last visual I want to show here before I wrap up this video. I saw it on X. I think maybe Simply Bitcoin posted it, but I thought it was pretty cool. This chart shows the capital gains tax on Bitcoin for countries around the globe. And as you can see, some countries have a 0% tax on Bitcoin. Some countries have a higher tax. We can look at Denmark with a 42% tax on Bitcoin. I think they're going to be lowering that pretty soon. And we see that China has banned Bitcoin. We've heard murmurs that they could be unbanning Bitcoin heading into next year, which would be another bullish catalyst to add into the mix. But I kind of feel like the way we are going to see this Bitcoin taxing game theory play out is that countries are going to continue to lower their tax rates really down to zero on Bitcoin as they want to attract more business to their country. They don't want people to leave the country, to send their Bitcoin elsewhere, right? They want it to stay there. And we can kind of compare this to the spot Bitcoin ETF launches. When we saw these spot Bitcoin ETFs launch in January of this year, we saw all these ETF issuers knocking down their fees on the ETF because they wanted to attract more capital to their ETF. And they realized, hey, if I have a 0.25% fee while Fidelity has a 2% fee, and I'm not sure what their fees are, I haven't looked at them in a while, but they realized, hey, if I have lower fees than this other issuer, then I'll attract more capital and I'll have a bigger ETF. And we can think about that in the same context here. If countries have lower taxes on Bitcoin, then people with Bitcoin are going to want to live there. Bitcoin businesses are going to want to be there. And companies who just hold Bitcoin are going to feel comfortable with headquarters in that country. So just something to think about. I believe that we will see a lot of these higher tax rates in some of these countries like Denmark, Ireland, Finland. We'll see these drop over time as they want to attract Bitcoin, not push it away. That wraps it up for this video. I think nation state game theory is going to be really exciting and it is going to do wonders for the Bitcoin price. So now is a good time to get in, even at 90,000 US dollars. If you didn't like and subscribe, please make sure to do that now. Thanks for watching. I'll be back soon.